President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, is confirmed. He will be the 5th current Supreme Court justice with ties to the Federalist Society. The other 4 are Justices Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Chief Justice John Roberts, and Clarence Thomas. So what exactly is the Federalist Society? The cover story of this month's Politico magazine looks at the group's history. The article is titled "The Weekend at Yale That Changed American Politics." Politico senior staff writer Michael Kruse wrote the article. He joins us from Davidson, North Carolina. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be with you.
Can you start out by giving us a general idea of what this society is and how it was born? You paint such an interesting picture of that weekend at Yale. And just to quote something that you write here, you say that it provided a blueprint in retrospect for how to marry youthful enthusiasm with intellectual oomph to achieve far-reaching results.
So at this point, the Federalist Society is 60,000 some odd law students, legal professionals, politicians, judges, dues-paying interested citizens. But back in April of 1982, it was the brainchild of basically 3 smart, ambitious, nerdy law students who had the idea to start something called the Federalist Society with a 3-day conference at Yale Law School, where they brought in a wide variety of thinkers, law professors, right of center, legal scholars to kick off sort of an ideas festival. And it's amazing to think that 3.5 decades later or so, they are in a position to essentially have a majority on the Supreme Court if Brett Kavanaugh gets confirmed, or anybody off of the list the Federalist Society gave to President Trump.
It is stunning to think how far-reaching, rather, their power is now. Who were those 3 law students?
So David McIntosh is now the president of Club for Growth. Lee Lipperman is still with the Federalist Society, and Stephen Calabrese is a professor at the law professor at Northwestern. Those 3 students, those 3 law students, they were at Yale and Northwestern, University of Chicago at the time. They knew each other from their undergrad days at Yale. They hatched the Federalist Society basically through phone calls and summer internships.
And why call it the Federalist Society? What is it about those writings in particular that ideologically they were drawn to? Tell us a little bit about the ideology behind this group.
Very concerned with sort of originalist, textualist interpretation of the Constitution, which is to say less of an interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution says what it says. How this translates into present day really is less government regulation, a more decentralized government, more power in the states, less power for the federal government to regulate essentially jurisprudence and American culture. And so a lot of the speeches there that weekend in New Haven in 1982 touched on those themes.
And so if Kavanaugh is confirmed, that would make 5 Supreme Court justices with ties to this society. That's an incredible accomplishment. How did they do that?
Diligent, consistent work for the last 35 years. Eager fundraising from right-of-center groups who saw the potential of the Federalist Society from the get-go. In fact, helped support that very first conference in New Haven in 1982. And then as it grew, sort of the influence became exponential in Washington and elsewhere. The Federalist Society has been putting people in presidential administrations and in federal judgeships basically since the mid-'80s. It is only now, though, that they are in a position to essentially have a majority on the Supreme Court, and that they have a president who's so transactionally and so explicitly sort of subcontracted the job of picking Supreme Court justices to the Federalist Society.
Right. Well, you write about the relationship between President Trump and the Federalist Society. You talk about that in your article, and you say it's a rather unlikely relationship. You even write it is strange, yet somehow an oddly perfect match. Trump, impetuous and transactional, and the Federalist Society, intellectual and methodical. So how are the 2 of them working together so well?
Well, they both wanted something that the other could give them. I mean, I think it's fair to say that, well, you can't say it with certainty, but I think it would have been less likely that Donald Trump, the candidate, would have been elected had he not had sort of an imprimatur from the Federalist Society, had he not had this list, giving those conservative voters who were skeptical of him personally a reason to pull the lever for him on November 8th, 2016, knowing that if he puts these kinds of judges on the Supreme Court, they would get the kinds of judges that they want. And so, the Federalist Society and Donald Trump, as I say in the story, are strange bedfellows, but they have arguably created the most successful single facet of the first year and a half of the Trump presidency, which is to say the appointments, and not just Supreme Court appointments, but throughout the federal judiciary.
Well, the last line of your article is that Trump is changing the country. He's already changed it because of them. I mean, so beyond the Supreme Court, which is what we all talk about and what we all see, there has been an incredible movement to the right, on federal benches across the country, correct?
Yes. I mean, there is this sense that the presidency of Donald Trump has been sort of bumbling, moving from chaos to chaos. This is not that. This has been the single most successful piece, or certainly very high on the list of accomplishments of the presidency of Donald Trump to this point. No matter what happens from here, no matter how long he's the president, no matter how his presidency ends, the influence that he has had on the federal judiciary, with the very direct help of the Federalist Society, will last for years and potentially several decades.
Yes. Yes. So, Michael, is there a liberal equivalent to the Federalist Society?
There is. The progressive liberal equivalent to the Federalist Society is something called the American Constitution Society. It was founded in 2001, so it's much, much newer. And it, partly because of that, but also just for other reasons, it has not had, to this point, nearly the level and the extent of the influence that the Federalist Society has been able to enjoy.
It's so interesting reading your piece because the sort of founders clearly felt like they were almost revolutionaries or reactionaries within law schools, if you will, because at the time, I guess, law schools seemed to be so liberal, and that really galvanized them. They were the outsiders. I have to say I was an undergraduate at Yale, and I interned at the Yale Law School Legal Society, legal office, where they give free legal advice to immigrants. Van Jones was a student there at the time, and it was the bastion of liberal legal thought. So it's amazing to think that there was all of this also going on at the same time.
They're sort of poking their fingers into the eyes of the liberal establishment, the liberal legal establishment at that time, with not unjustified reason. They're, a year and a half into the presidency of Ronald Reagan. They feel ascendant. They feel emboldened. Conservative ideas are on the move. And so why shouldn't there be, in their mind, some sort of organization that reflects the direction the country is moving in at that time, and why wouldn't they be the ones to start it? And so they did, and so here we are.
And by any measure, they've achieved enormous success. Michael Kruse, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.